The Somme offensive in the autumn of 1916 exists as a monument to industrial slaughter, where the British Empire bleeds itself white across a front that stretches 25 miles through the chalky farmland of northern France, terrain that had been pastoral countryside before becoming the proving ground for tactics that measure territorial gain in yards purchased with tens of thousands of lives. The preliminary bombardment that preceded the disastrous assault of July 1st fired more shells than the entire British Army had expended in all previous wars combined, yet achieved so little tactical advantage that subsequent operations have devolved into attritional warfare that consumes divisions without gaining objectives worth the cost in human suffering. Captain Harold Blackwood, commanding D Company of the 12th Battalion, Yorkshire Regiment, studies German positions through periscope equipment that reveals defensive works constructed with methodical precision across terrain that offers natural advantages to defenders while providing no concealment for attacking forces. The enemy trenches, invisible from ground level, appear as geometric scars that incorporate the village ruins of Flers into defensive networks designed by engineers who understand that modern warfare favors systematic defense over heroic assault. The strategic objective that justified committing 60,000 casualties on the first day alone, breaking through German lines to reach open country where cavalry could exploit tactical success, has proven as obsolete as the tactical methods employed to achieve it. Each subsequent attack generates casualty lists that exceed the populations of entire English market towns, while advancing the front line by distances measured in hundreds of yards rather than the miles required for strategic significance. But it is the local French population, those few farmers and villagers who remain in areas devastated by 2 years of continuous warfare, who speak in whispers about phenomena that neither British nor German military intelligence acknowledges in operational reports. According to traditions maintained in dialects that preserve elements of medieval French, certain regions of the battlefield have become haunted by creatures that appeared during the bloodiest engagements, beasts whose forms combine canine characteristics with supernatural attributes that enable them to move through the killing fields as harbingers of death and protectors of the dying. The folklore describes massive hounds with eyes that burn like artillery flashes, their forms visible only during moments of supreme crisis when the boundary between life and death becomes permeable to those facing imminent mortality. They are said to appear at the moment of final assault, moving through machine gun fire and artillery barrages without sustaining injury, seeking out wounded soldiers regardless of nationality to provide comfort during their final moments or guidance back to safety through paths that conventional navigation cannot explain. The geological characteristics of the Somme region create conditions that folk wisdom associates with supernatural manifestation. The chalk bedrock, formed during the Cretaceous period when this area lay beneath a shallow sea, contains fossil deposits that local tradition claims preserve the essence of every creature that died here across geological time. The soil, enriched by centuries of agricultural cultivation, and now saturated with the blood of 500,000 casualties, displays mineral content that regional knowledge associates with the ability to anchor spiritual energy in specific locations. Captain Blackwood's morning inspection of British positions reveals conditions that satisfy neither tactical requirements nor basic human dignity. The trenches, carved into ground, that agricultural surveys identify as among the most fertile in northern France, create defensive networks that transform productive farmland into a wasteland of mud, barbed wire, and unburied corpses, where survival depends on resources that military logistics can barely provide, despite unprecedented industrial mobilization. The weather conditions typical for September in northern France: morning temperatures hovering near freezing, humidity levels that make woolen uniforms perpetually damp, and ground conditions that transform every shell crater into a stagnant pool-breeding disease, create an environment where distinguishing between natural decay and supernatural manifestation becomes increasingly difficult for men whose psychological resilience has been eroded by months of continuous exposure to mechanized killing. In the battalion headquarters, established in a dugout that incorporates masonry salvaged from the destroyed Church of Courcelette, British officers study intelligence reports that describe German defensive capabilities enhanced by what appear to be auxiliary forces whose nature conventional military analysis cannot adequately explain. The enemy positions demonstrate coordination with entities that move through no man's land without triggering defensive fires, providing intelligence and tactical support that transcends normal reconnaissance capabilities. Lieutenant James Morrison, serving as battalion intelligence officer, reviews patrol reports that document encounters with phenomena that resist classification within standard military experience. British scouts describe contact with creatures that demonstrate impossible movement capabilities across terrain swept by machine gun fire, while German prisoners captured during failed assaults speak of guidance received from entities that their interrogators cannot identify or verify through conventional intelligence methods. The enemy appears to possess auxiliary forces that operate according to capabilities exceeding documented animal behavior. Morrison reports during morning briefings that attempt to translate battlefield observations into language that staff officers can accommodate. Large quadrupeds that move through killing zones without sustaining casualties, demonstrating intelligence that suggests trained military animals, yet exhibiting characteristics that exceed normal zoological parameters. The patrol reports contain additional anomalies that resist classification within normal military experience. Soldiers describe encounters with massive canines that appear during the most intense fighting, providing assistance to wounded personnel regardless of uniform, while demonstrating navigation capabilities that enable movement through terrain rendered impassable by artillery bombardment and defensive obstacles. Dr. William Hartwell, a veterinary surgeon attached to the Division for Care of Military Animals, provides professional assessment of reported creature encounters that bridges scientific training with battlefield observation. His preliminary conclusions suggest either revolutionary developments in military animal training that exceed contemporary zoological knowledge or contact with entities that operate outside normal biological parameters. The descriptions indicate canines displaying intelligence and physical capabilities that exceed any documented military working dog program, Hartwell explains during classified briefings that attempt to evaluate supernatural phenomena through scientific methodology. Size estimates suggest animals approaching the scale of small horses, yet maintaining mobility that enables navigation through terrain that stops mechanized equipment and kills unprotected humans within seconds. The morning artillery preparation, conducted according to schedules that coordinate British, Canadian, and South African batteries across a front extending from the Albert Bapaume Road to the Ancre River, creates acoustic conditions that transform the battlefield into a reverberating chamber where distinguishing between mechanical noise and animal vocalizations becomes impossible through normal auditory assessment. The thunder of heavy guns, amplified by chalk formations that include natural caves and human-constructed tunnels, produces an environment where supernatural manifestations blend seamlessly with the industrial cacophony of modern warfare. The tactical situation reflects the fundamental challenge that has plagued the Somme offensive since its inception: the impossibility of achieving surprise against defenders who occupy fortified positions while possessing comprehensive observation over approaches that offer no natural concealment. Every British assault must cross open ground swept by interlocking fields of fire, navigating obstacles designed to channel attacking forces into killing zones where machine guns and artillery can achieve maximum effectiveness. Yet recent operations have achieved tactical successes that exceed theoretical capabilities, suggesting access to intelligence sources or tactical assistance that conventional military doctrine cannot explain. Assault units demonstrate enhanced coordination during advances through no man's land, while casualty evacuation proceeds with efficiency that saves lives under conditions where medical personnel should be unable to locate and retrieve wounded soldiers scattered across terrain rendered impassable by defensive fires. As the sun climbs toward its zenith and another day of systematic attrition begins across the ridges that separate British trenches from German defensive positions, the morning patrol prepares to venture into no man's land, where three armies, Allied, German, and the invisible forces of supernatural guardianship, continue their complex interaction of attack, defense, and protection across ground that has become sacred through the sacrifice of men whose courage transcends the political objectives that justify their suffering. The briefing takes place in a command dugout 30 feet below ground level, its walls reinforced with timber salvaged from the destroyed village of Mametz and lined with corrugated iron that bears the manufacturer's stamps of peacetime industrial production now repurposed for the machinery of war. Captain Blackwood spreads aerial reconnaissance photographs across a table improvised from ammunition crates, the images captured by Royal Flying Corps observers who risk their lives daily to document German defensive improvements that render previous tactical planning obsolete within hours of its completion. The mission parameters reflect the desperate need for accurate intelligence regarding German positions before the renewed offensive scheduled to begin with the deployment of the war's newest tactical innovation, armored vehicles that military planners believe will restore mobility to battlefield operations dominated by defensive firepower. General Haig's strategy requires detailed knowledge of enemy strongpoints, communication trenches, and defensive obstacles before committing the precious few tanks available to operations that must succeed or condemn the entire Somme offensive to strategic failure. Second Lieutenant Geoffrey Ashford, commanding 2nd Platoon of D Company, examines the reconnaissance objectives with professional attention to details that determine whether his men return alive from missions that have already claimed the lives of 17 separate patrol leaders during the past month. His platoon consists of 28 men drawn from the coal mines and steel mills of Sheffield and Leeds, possessing skills that prove invaluable in trench warfare: the ability to move silently through confined spaces, to distinguish between structural sounds and human activity, and to navigate underground networks where a single wrong turn can lead to capture or death in enemy positions. German defensive works approximately 600 yards northeast of our forward saps, Blackwood explains, indicating positions that aerial photography reveals as a complex network of trenches, strong points, and communication tunnels constructed with engineering precision that exceeds British defensive capabilities. Intelligence estimates indicate they've been reinforcing these positions since our failed assault of 1st September, probably bringing up additional machine gun sections and installing new defensive obstacles. The tactical intelligence reports describe German defensive innovations that appear to incorporate animal auxiliary forces whose capabilities transcend normal military working dog applications. Enemy positions demonstrate coordination with entities that move through no man's land during hours of darkness, providing reconnaissance information and early warning systems that enable defensive responses to British preparations with accuracy that conventional observation cannot explain. Sergeant William Davies, a veteran of 18 months' service on the Western Front, whose survival through the disasters of 1st July and subsequent failed offensives demonstrates exceptional professional competence, brings hard-earned experience to the evaluation of tactical challenges that combine conventional military problems with environmental factors unique to the Somme battlefield. "The ground between our lines and Jerry positions is a charnel house, sir," Davies reports with the blunt assessment of a career NCO whose tactical evaluations prove accurate because they acknowledge realities that optimistic planning cannot accommodate. Open terrain swept by interlocking machine gun fire scattered with unburied corpses that provide the only cover available, all under direct observation from enemy positions that command every approach. The geological surveys, conducted by Royal Engineers with mining backgrounds, describe terrain conditions that create unique challenges for reconnaissance operations, while providing possible explanations for reported animal behavior that exceeds normal zoological parameters. The chalk bedrock contains extensive natural cave systems that connect various points across the battlefield, creating underground networks that could theoretically enable movement by large animals while providing concealment from surface observation and defensive fires. Dr. Hartwell, consulted regarding the military application of reported animal encounters, provides analysis that bridges veterinary science with tactical intelligence requirements. According to his professional assessment, the described creatures demonstrate behavioral patterns that suggest either revolutionary advances in military animal training or contact with entities that operate outside normal biological limitations. The reported animals display intelligence levels that exceed documented canine capabilities, Hartwell explains, during briefings that attempt to evaluate supernatural phenomena through scientific methodology. Size estimates indicate creatures approaching 150 pounds body weight, yet maintaining speed and agility that enables navigation through terrain that stops trained military personnel. Most significantly, they demonstrate apparent immunity to small arms fire and artillery effects. The mission briefing includes consultation with local French civilians whose traditional knowledge provides perspective that military intelligence cannot obtain through conventional reconnaissance methods. Marcel Dubois, an elderly farmer whose family has worked this land since medieval times, offers information about regional folklore that bridges indigenous understanding with contemporary military requirements. The old people speak of the chien de guerre, the war dogs that appear when the killing becomes too much for the earth to bear. Dubois explains in the mixture of French and English that serves as the common language of military cooperation. They come to guide the dying to peace, to carry messages between the living and the dead, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. They serve no army, recognize no uniform, acknowledge only the law that says no man should die alone. The tactical timeline allows for a 48-hour reconnaissance operation, with the platoon advancing through no man's land under cover of darkness to establish observation posts within effective range of German positions while avoiding contact with defensive patrols whose knowledge of local terrain exceeds British familiarity with ground that changes configuration with each artillery bombardment. The equipment manifest reflects lessons learned through 2 months of tactical failure that have claimed casualties approaching 100,000 men while advancing the British front line less than 3 miles. Each soldier carries a short magazine Lee Enfield rifle, 200 rounds of ammunition, and emergency rations calculated to sustain patrol operations, while minimizing load weight that could compromise mobility across terrain where speed often determines survival. But the mission briefing contains elements suggesting preparation for encounters with phenomena that conventional military doctrine cannot adequately address. The platoon receives specialized equipment that includes not only standard reconnaissance gear, but also items whose purpose extends beyond routine intelligence gathering: high-powered electric torches with extended battery life, emergency signaling devices designed to penetrate unusual atmospheric interference, and medical supplies that include treatments for injuries that standard military medicine cannot classify. The communication procedures incorporate contingencies, acknowledging the possibility of patrol operations extending beyond normal tactical parameters. Emergency frequencies reserved for contact with phenomena requiring immediate extraction, recognition signals distinguishing between conventional enemy contact and encounters transcending normal military experience, and evacuation protocols designed for circumstances where standard rescue procedures prove inadequate. Corporal Thomas Mitchell, the platoon's senior NCO, whose experience includes service in South Africa and India, provides guidance based on frontier warfare in regions where local supernatural beliefs prove operationally relevant to military success. His knowledge of indigenous spiritual traditions suggests that certain battlefield conditions may require procedures that conventional military training cannot provide. In the Punjab, we learned that some ground holds more than soil and stone. Mitchell explains to assembled NCOs whose industrial backgrounds provide framework for understanding references to phenomena that exceed normal experience. Places where too many men have died, where the earth gets saturated with violence, sometimes things come to balance the accounts. Same might apply here, where the killing's been going on for months without pause. The final preparation involves review of intelligence reports that acknowledge gaps in British understanding of German defensive capabilities and the tactical conditions that enable enemy forces to maintain effective resistance despite overwhelming Allied material superiority. Patrol reports describe defensive coordination that transcends normal command and control capabilities, early warning systems that detect British preparations with accuracy suggesting surveillance methods unknown to contemporary military technology, and casualty evacuation procedures that enable German forces to remove wounded personnel from positions under direct fire with efficiency that exceeds theoretical possibilities. As the briefing concludes, each member of 2nd Platoon receives personal equipment that includes items whose military application remains unclear despite obvious relevance to anticipated mission conditions. Maps showing not only contemporary trench systems, but also archaeological features predating current warfare, emergency provisions calculated for extended operations under circumstances that may prevent normal resupply, and personal protective equipment designed for environmental hazards that standard military doctrine does not acknowledge. The reconnaissance mission will commence at 2200 hours, beginning an operation that will carry British forces across terrain where the boundaries between conventional warfare and supernatural intervention become increasingly difficult to distinguish, where the protective spirits of the battlefield may prove more significant than the strategic objectives of opposing armies. The advance through no man's land begins during the deepest hours of night, when darkness creates conditions so absolute that movement depends entirely on compass bearings and the hard-won knowledge of men who have learned to navigate by the distinctive sounds of different artillery pieces, the varying patterns of machine gun fire, and the subtle changes in air pressure that precede gas attacks. 2nd Lieutenant Ashford leads 2nd Platoon through shell craters that have obliterated every trace of the pastoral countryside that once characterized this region, creating a lunar landscape where twisted metal and human remains blend with chalk and clay in configurations that challenge both sanity and navigation. The temperature hovers near 40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to numb exposed flesh, yet not sufficient to freeze the stagnant water that fills every depression, creating pools that range from ankle-deep inconvenience to man-swallowing death traps concealed beneath innocent-appearing surfaces. The air carries scents that have become the defining characteristics of the Western Front. Cordite residue from continuous bombardment, the sweet corruption of unburied corpses, and the acrid bite of poison gas that lingers in low-lying areas despite wind conditions that should have dispersed chemical weapons hours ago. Private James Henderson, serving as lead scout for the patrol's advance element, possesses navigation skills learned during 10 years of work in the Yorkshire coal mines that prove invaluable for movement through terrain where conventional landmarks have ceased to exist. His ability to maintain direction despite complete darkness and to distinguish between natural sounds and enemy activity enables progress across ground where visibility extends less than arm's length. Yet within the first hour of movement, he reports phenomena that mining experience cannot adequately explain. "Sir, there's something moving parallel to our route," Henderson whispers through hand signals that maintain communication while preserving the tactical silence essential for survival in no man's land. Large animals, moving in formation like trained military dogs, but the size estimates are all wrong. These things are massive, bigger than any dog I've ever seen, moving with coordination that suggests professional training. The acoustic environment of the Somme battlefield creates conditions where sound transmission defies normal expectations, with chalk formations and shell-created cavities producing echoes, distortions, and amplifications that make accurate distance estimation impossible through conventional auditory methods. The continuous background noise of artillery fire from sectors across the entire Western Front creates an acoustic foundation that can mask nearby movement while carrying distant sounds with startling clarity. Sergeant Davies, whose survival through multiple failed offensives has required development of enhanced situational awareness that borders on supernatural intuition, recognizes implications that extend beyond routine reconnaissance challenges. The movement patterns detected by the patrol suggest not random animal activity, but organized coordination by entities whose tactical understanding encompasses both British and German operational procedures. The formations are too disciplined for wild animals, but too large for any military working dog program. Davies reports during the tactical halt that allows assessment of conditions ahead. They're maintaining interval and distance like trained military personnel, yet moving through terrain that stops our best scouts. Either we're observing something that exceeds normal animal behavior, or we're dealing with entities that operate outside conventional biological limitations. The patrol route, plotted to avoid known German positions while utilizing shell craters for concealment, leads through areas that aerial reconnaissance identifies as containing unusual concentrations of unburied casualties from previous failed assaults. The July 1st attack alone generated 60,000 British casualties, many of whom remain where they fell due to German machine gun fire that makes recovery operations impossible during daylight hours and extremely hazardous after dark. Private William Collins, whose background in steelworks metallurgy provides expertise relevant to evaluating damaged military equipment, discovers material evidence that challenges assumptions about battlefield conditions and animal behavior. Scattered throughout no man's land are fragments of military gear that show damage patterns inconsistent with artillery effects or small arms fire, tooth marks in steel helmets, claw scratches in rifle stocks, and leather equipment torn with precision that suggests deliberate removal rather than random battlefield destruction. The damage patterns indicate large predators with dental and claw capabilities exceeding any documented European fauna, Collins reports during examination of recovered equipment fragments. Bite marks in steel that require jaw pressure approaching that of large African carnivores, yet the tooth spacing suggests canine rather than feline anatomy. Whatever made these marks possesses physical capabilities that transcend normal zoological parameters. The deeper into no man's land the patrol advances, the more evidence they encounter of activity that defies conventional military or zoological explanation. Paths through defensive obstacles that appear overnight despite continuous observation. Areas of ground that remain mysteriously clear of poison gas despite wind patterns that should concentrate chemical weapons in those locations. And water sources that stay remarkably pure despite contamination from decomposing organic matter scattered across the surrounding terrain. Lance Corporal Edward Murphy, whose experience in underground mining provides perspective on subsurface navigation and structural assessment, investigates cave openings that appear to connect natural limestone formations with shell craters and abandoned trench works. His preliminary exploration reveals passages that extend far beyond the scope of natural geological formation, suggesting modification by entities possessing both the physical capability and tactical understanding necessary to create underground networks spanning the entire battlefield. These aren't natural caves or human construction, Murphy reports, after examining architectural features that demonstrate clear evidence of intentional modification. The excavation techniques show capabilities that exceed both animal instinct and human engineering. Someone or something has been creating underground routes that connect positions across the entire front, using methods that incorporate both natural cave systems and artificial construction. The patrol encounters increasing evidence of recent activity by entities whose behavior patterns transcend normal military animal applications. Supply caches positioned at locations that demonstrate intimate knowledge of British patrol routes, areas where wounded soldiers have been moved to positions offering better protection from artillery fire, and defensive obstacles that have been selectively modified to create concealed passages enabling movement between opposing trench systems. The most disturbing discovery occurs when Private Henderson identifies tracks in ground that should preserve clear impressions of any passage. The paw prints measure over 6 inches in length, with claw marks extending an additional 2 inches, suggesting animals approaching the size of small horses, yet maintaining the digital structure characteristic of canines. Most significantly, the tracks appear and disappear without logical connection, as if the creatures responsible can materialize and dematerialize according to tactical requirements. The track patterns violate basic principles of animal locomotion, Henderson reports during detailed examination of ground conditions that preserve evidence of impossible movement. The prints are too large for any documented canine species, yet they show digital structure inconsistent with other large predators. More importantly, they appear and disappear in locations where continuous passage should leave connecting impressions. As the patrol establishes its forward observation post in a shell crater that provides minimal concealment while offering views across the approaches to German lines, the men begin to experience phenomena that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of battlefield conditions. The sensation of being observed by entities whose presence cannot be confirmed through normal visual detection, sounds of movement that seem to originate from multiple directions simultaneously, and the persistent feeling that their mission has attracted attention from forces whose objectives transcend the tactical goals of opposing armies. The night air, heavy with moisture from the perpetual dampness that characterizes the Somme battlefield, begins to carry new scents that have no logical source. The warm odor of healthy animal fur, despite the absence of any living creatures that should survive in this devastated landscape, the metallic scent of fresh blood despite hours of tactical silence that should preclude recent casualties, and something else that Private Collins later describes as the smell of very old loyalty, as if the ground itself exhales the accumulated devotion of creatures whose service transcends the temporal boundaries of individual conflicts. In the distance, barely audible above the constant background noise of artillery fire, the patrol begins to detect sounds that conventional military experience cannot classify. Low-frequency vocalizations that suggest communication between large animals, coordinated movement that indicates tactical formation changes conducted by entities operating according to discipline and purpose, and the distinctive acoustic signatures of creatures whose vocal capabilities exceed those of any documented European fauna. As dawn approaches, and the patrol must seek better concealment before German observation posts can detect their presence, the men of 2nd Platoon realize that their reconnaissance mission has brought them into contact with forces whose existence challenges every assumption about the nature of battlefield conditions, the relationship between life and death in combat environments, and the possibility that some conflicts generate spiritual responses that transcend the political objectives of the armies involved in their conduct. The first visual contact occurs during the gray pre-dawn hours when morning mist rises from the shell-torn earth like the exhalation of some vast wounded creature, transforming the battlefield into a liminal space where the boundary between the living world and the realm of the dead becomes permeable to those whose circumstances require them to witness the impossible. Second Lieutenant Ashford, maintaining watch from the rim of a crater that provides minimal concealment while offering observation of German defensive positions, encounters movement that his training at officer school cannot adequately classify. The creatures emerge from ground mist with deliberate purpose that suggests not random animal behavior, but organized military deployment conducted according to tactical principles that span multiple species and historical periods. Their forms materialize with gradual persistence, revealing canine characteristics amplified to proportions that challenge biological possibility. Massive hounds standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder, their forms combining the sleek build of coursing dogs with the muscular development of war horses, their eyes burning with phosphorescent light that illuminates the surrounding terrain without casting shadows or attracting defensive fire from German positions. As the demon dogs approach within 50 yards of the British observation post, dawn light reveals details that overwhelm conventional understanding of zoology, military science, and the relationship between natural creatures and supernatural manifestation. Their fur appears black at distance yet shows deep red highlights when examined closely, as if each hair contains fire rather than pigment. Their movements demonstrate coordination that transcends pack behavior, suggesting intelligence that encompasses tactical understanding of battlefield conditions, defensive positions, and the psychological state of human combatants. Yet despite their fearsome appearance and impossible physical characteristics, the demon dogs approach the British position with careful deliberation that suggests recognition rather than predation. They move with respect for human military protocol, maintaining distance that acknowledges the patrol's defensive capabilities while demonstrating intentions that transcend aggressive or territorial behavior. Sergeant Davies, whose frontier experience has taught him to distinguish between natural predators and supernatural entities whose purposes extend beyond immediate survival requirements, recognizes the approach as communication rather than attack. His signal to the patrol prevents defensive action that might transform supernatural diplomacy into hostile contact, allowing interaction with beings whose capabilities could easily overwhelm human resistance, yet whose intentions appear benevolent. Hold weapons, but do not aim, Davies orders. With authority earned through 18 months of survival in conditions where tactical judgment determines not only personal survival, but the welfare of subordinate personnel. These aren't natural animals, but they're not showing aggressive behavior. Something about their approach suggests they want to communicate. The lead creature, larger than its companions and bearing scars that suggest extensive combat experience across multiple historical periods, approaches within conversational distance while maintaining formations that demonstrate military discipline. Its behavior displays intelligence that transcends animal instinct while acknowledging human tactical capabilities through movements that respect the lethality of contemporary weapons while demonstrating immunity to conventional defensive measures. Private Henderson, whose mining background provides experience with working animals whose intelligence exceeds casual observation, documents the encounter with attention to details that might prove tactically significant. His notes record not only physical characteristics, but behavioral patterns that suggest the demon dogs operate according to objectives that encompass both British and German tactical interests while serving purposes that transcend national boundaries. They're not approaching like predators or even like trained military animals, Henderson observes, during the tense moments that determine whether supernatural contact becomes hostile engagement or peaceful communication. Their movements suggest they recognize our tactical situation and are attempting to establish contact according to protocols we don't understand, but which acknowledge our military authority. The demon dogs demonstrate their nature through actions that reveal capabilities exceeding normal biological limitations, while serving purposes that unite rather than divide the opposing forces trapped in the Somme's killing fields. The lead creature approaches the crater's edge and deposits equipment that British forces have lost during previous failed assaults. Personal effects from casualties whose bodies remain scattered across no man's land, ammunition and medical supplies that disappeared during tactical withdrawals, and items that possess emotional significance to soldiers whose survival depends on maintaining connection with home and peacetime identity. Dr. Hartwell's veterinary training provides no framework for evaluating creatures whose characteristics combine recognizable canine anatomy with supernatural attributes that challenge basic assumptions about biological possibility. Yet his professional observation reveals behavioral patterns that suggest the demon dogs serve functions that transcend predation, territorial defense, or any documented military animal application. These creatures demonstrate intelligence that equals or exceeds human cognitive capabilities. Hartwell documents and notes that will receive classification beyond normal military security protocols. Their behavior suggests not only recognition of individual human personnel, but understanding of tactical situations, emotional states, and psychological requirements that enable continued military effectiveness under extreme stress conditions. The demon dogs reveal their purpose through demonstrations that transform supernatural encounter into recognition of entities whose service encompasses the welfare of all combatants, regardless of uniform or national allegiance. They guide the patrol's attention to locations where wounded soldiers from previous engagements remain alive, despite conditions that should have proven fatal, indicating concealed positions where German and British casualties have been provided with protection from artillery fire and access to water sources that remain pure despite widespread contamination. They're showing us wounded men, ours and theirs, who've been moved to positions that offer better protection. Corporal Mitchell reports, after following the demon dog's guidance to concealed areas that aerial reconnaissance had identified as empty terrain. Someone or something has been providing medical assistance and basic care to casualties from both sides, maintaining life under conditions where human intervention should be impossible. The revelation transforms the reconnaissance mission from routine intelligence gathering into encounter with supernatural forces that actively intervene in battlefield conditions, according to principles that prioritize human welfare over tactical advantage. The demon dogs represent not neutral observers of human conflict, but active participants whose intervention serves moral rather than military objectives. Lieutenant Ashford faces a decision that extends far beyond conventional tactical assessment. The demon dogs offer not only intelligence regarding German positions, but partnership in operations that transcend the boundaries between opposing armies, requiring acknowledgement of responsibilities that extend beyond national loyalty to encompass obligations that unite rather than divide the men trapped in conditions that reduce human existence to its most fundamental elements. "What do you require of us?" Ashford asks, addressing the lead creature with the courtesy appropriate for military communication, while maintaining awareness that conventional diplomatic protocols provide no guidance for negotiation with entities whose existence violates basic assumptions about the nature of reality. The demon dog's response reveals through action rather than speech their role as guardians of battlefield mercy whose service spans every conflict where human courage confronts industrial slaughter. They demonstrate their intelligence network by revealing German positions, defensive obstacles, and tactical plans with accuracy that exceeds conventional reconnaissance, while simultaneously indicating British casualties who remain alive in areas previously assessed as completely hostile. Their assistance comes with implicit understanding that cooperation requires acceptance of moral obligations that transcend tactical objectives, the recognition that enemy soldiers deserve the same protection and assistance provided to Allied personnel, that military success achieved through supernatural aid carries responsibilities that extend beyond immediate strategic advantage, and that contact with forces operating beyond normal human limitations transforms military service into participation in something greater than national conflict. As morning light strengthens and the daily artillery bombardment prepares to resume across the Somme front, the demon dogs fade back into terrain that should offer no concealment for creatures of their size, their departure as mysterious as their initial manifestation, yet leaving behind evidence of supernatural assistance that will determine whether 2nd Platoon returns to report conventional intelligence or acknowledges partnership with entities whose service transcends the temporal boundaries of individual military campaigns. The descent into the underground sanctuary begins through passages that appear on no military survey, yet demonstrate construction techniques that blend natural cave formation with modifications that serve purposes transcending human engineering capabilities. The lead demon dog guides the British patrol through openings that require crawling through spaces barely large enough for human transit, yet the creatures themselves move with fluid grace that suggests their physical forms can adapt to spatial requirements according to supernatural principles rather than biological limitations. The tunnels extend far beyond the scope of natural limestone formation, creating an underground network that connects positions across the entire Somme battlefield through passages that demonstrate both geological knowledge and tactical understanding that spans multiple historical periods. The walls show evidence of modification by entities possessing not only physical capabilities exceeding human engineering, but also architectural vision that incorporates defensive positions, medical facilities, and storage areas designed to support operations whose temporal scope transcends individual military campaigns. At the heart of the underground complex, in vast chambers that extend beneath the killing fields where two armies have bled themselves white in pursuit of tactical objectives that justify unspeakable human suffering, Lieutenant Ashford and his men encounter the full scope of what they have discovered. Hundreds of demon dogs occupy positions along stone galleries that rise toward vaulted ceilings, their formations representing not pack hierarchy, but military organization that demonstrates coordination between supernatural entities whose service encompasses every battlefield, where industrial warfare has reduced human conflict to mechanized slaughter. The sight overwhelms conventional understanding of animal behavior, military organization, and the relationship between natural creatures and supernatural purpose. Demon dogs, whose scars indicate service across multiple historical periods, maintain formations with creatures whose unmarked coats suggest recent recruitment to supernatural guardianship, while their collective behavior demonstrates coordination that transcends species limitations through shared dedication to objectives that unite rather than divide the various armies whose conflicts generate the casualties they serve. Yet the most profound revelation lies not in the diversity of the assembled creatures, but in their unified purpose, demonstrated through actions that reveal the true scope of their intervention in human warfare. The underground chambers contain not only the demon dogs, but also evidence of their work. Wounded soldiers from every army currently engaged on the Western Front, provided with medical care that transcends contemporary military medicine while awaiting recovery that will enable their return to surface warfare or peaceful transition to whatever lies beyond mortal military service. The lead demon dog, whose bearing suggests supreme authority that transcends normal pack leadership, guides Lieutenant Ashford to elevated positions that provide commanding views across the entire underground complex. From this vantage point, the scale of supernatural intervention becomes visible in formations that extend beyond human comprehension, revealing operations that encompass not only the Somme battlefield, but every location where the Great War has generated casualties whose courage deserves recognition regardless of the flags they followed into combat. The creature's communication transcends normal animal vocalization through methods that convey complex information directly to human consciousness. Without speech, yet with clarity that exceeds verbal explanation, the demon dog reveals its nature and purpose through mental images, emotional understanding, and knowledge transfer that enables human comprehension of supernatural objectives that operate on temporal and geographical scales beyond normal military experience. We are the guardians of the fallen, the keepers of final mercy. The communication conveys through means that bypass normal sensory channels. Every battlefield where courage confronts industrial slaughter generates spiritual energy sufficient to manifest our presence. We serve no army, acknowledge no flag, recognize only the obligation to ensure that no warrior dies alone, forgotten, or without honor. Dr. Hartwell, documenting phenomena that challenge fundamental assumptions about consciousness, communication, and the relationship between natural creatures and supernatural manifestation, observes that exposure to the demon dogs produces measurable changes in human psychological and physiological function. The patrol members display enhanced awareness that transcends normal sensory capabilities, while their understanding of battlefield conditions incorporates knowledge they could not have acquired through conventional military training. The men are experiencing expanded consciousness that enables direct knowledge transfer, Hartwell documents in notes that will never appear in official veterinary records. They demonstrate understanding of tactical situations, enemy positions, and casualty locations that conventional reconnaissance could not provide, suggesting access to information networks operating beyond normal intelligence gathering capabilities. Sergeant Davies, whose survival through multiple failed offensives has required development of intuitive understanding that transcends tactical training, recognizes that partnership with the demon dogs offers not only tactical advantage but transformation of military service itself. Their assistance enables operations that serve moral rather than strategic objectives, protecting life rather than destroying it, uniting rather than dividing the men whose courage transcends the political boundaries that justify their sacrifice. They're offering us something beyond military cooperation, Davies realizes, as the scope of supernatural assistance becomes clear through demonstration rather than explanation. Partnership and service that continues beyond individual campaigns, beyond national boundaries, beyond the temporal limitations that define mortal military careers. The demon dogs demonstrate their capabilities through tactical displays that reveal the full extent of their intervention in contemporary warfare. Underground chambers contain detailed intelligence regarding every army currently engaged on the Western Front, updated continuously through surveillance methods that transcend conventional reconnaissance while providing tactical information that serves protective rather than aggressive objectives. Maps appear that show not only military positions, but the locations of every wounded soldier across the entire battlefield, regardless of uniform or nationality, with medical assessment that indicates treatment requirements, recovery potential, and moral obligations that transcend tactical considerations. The intelligence encompasses not only current casualties, but projected outcomes of various strategic decisions, enabling prediction of human cost associated with military operations while suggesting alternative approaches that minimize suffering while achieving legitimate defensive objectives. They're showing us the true cost of the war, Private Henderson observes as the demon dogs reveal casualty projections that staff officers never acknowledge in operational planning. Not just numbers on reports, but individual men with families, dreams, obligations that extend beyond military service. They want us to understand that every tactical decision affects real people whose lives have value beyond strategic calculation. The demon dogs reveal their recruitment methods through demonstrations that show the transformation of battlefield casualties into supernatural guardians whose service transcends mortal limitations. Soldiers who die in acts of courage that transcend tactical necessity, who sacrifice personal survival for the welfare of comrades regardless of nationality, who demonstrate moral courage that honors military service regardless of strategic outcome. These men receive invitation to continue their service beyond the reach of death through partnership with entities whose dedication encompasses all who serve with honor. Join us, and your service continues beyond the limitations of individual mortality. the lead creature communicates through methods that transcend normal speech. Your skills in reconnaissance and tactical assessment will prove invaluable in operations that span not months but decades, not individual campaigns, but the entire development of human warfare toward objectives that serve protection rather than destruction. The choice confronts every member of 2nd Platoon with possibilities that military training never prepared them to consider. Partnership with the Demon Dogs offers continuation of military purpose beyond death, but according to principles that prioritize mercy over victory, protection over conquest, unity over division among men whose shared experience of warfare transcends the political objectives that justify their individual sacrifice. Corporal Mitchell, whose frontier experience has provided exposure to phenomena that exist outside conventional military doctrine, recognizes that acceptance of supernatural partnership will transform not only individual destiny, but understanding of military service itself. The Demon Dogs operate according to moral rather than national criteria, supporting actions that minimize human suffering while opposing operations that prioritize tactical advantage over humanitarian consideration. As the morning artillery bombardment begins on the surface above, where living armies prepare for another day of mechanized slaughter that will add hundreds of names to casualty lists that already exceed the populations of entire English counties, the Demon Dogs await decisions that will determine whether the British patrol returns to report conventional intelligence or remains to join the eternal guardianship that preserves the honor and continues the service of all who die in defense of principles that transcend temporary political boundaries. The choice need not be made immediately. The lead creature communicates with patience that reflects understanding acquired through service spanning multiple human generations. But remember what you have witnessed here. Remember that service to a greater cause offers rewards that military victory cannot provide. The guardians of battlefield mercy await those who choose protection over destruction, mercy over revenge, eternal service over temporary glory. The return from the reconnaissance mission requires 36 hours of careful movement through no man's land that appears fundamentally transformed by the patrol's encounter with forces whose existence challenges every assumption about the nature of warfare, moral obligation, and the relationship between individual military service and eternal responsibility for the protection of human life. Lieutenant Ashford leads his men back through terrain that seems simultaneously familiar and alien, where every shell crater and defensive obstacle carries new significance as potential gathering places for supernatural entities whose intervention transcends the tactical boundaries of opposing armies. The psychological transformation of the patrol members manifests in ways that challenge standard military understanding of combat stress and battlefield trauma. Rather than displaying the disorientation and emotional numbing typical of soldiers exposed to experiences beyond their training, the men demonstrate enhanced moral awareness, improved coordination in life-saving activities, and profound sense of purpose that transcends their original mission objectives while encompassing obligations that extend far beyond conventional military duty. Private Henderson, whose detailed documentation of supernatural encounters provides the most comprehensive record of communication between British forces and the Demon Dogs, continues to receive information through channels that conventional intelligence gathering cannot explain. His reports accurately predict German casualty evacuation schedules, medical supply movements, and humanitarian activities that should require access to enemy command communications, yet clearly serve protective rather than tactical objectives. I can hear them coordinating rescue operations across the entire front. Henderson reports during debriefings that attempt to document phenomena beyond normal military experience. Not just for our lads, but for German wounded as well. They're sharing information about casualty locations, medical requirements, and evacuation routes that save lives, regardless of which uniform the wounded men wear. Dr. Hartwell's medical evaluations reveal physiological changes that persist despite the patrol's return to conventional military environment. The men display altered brainwave patterns characterized by enhanced empathy responses, improved threat assessment capabilities that prioritize protection over aggression, and demonstrated knowledge of field medicine techniques that they never acquired through formal military training. They're exhibiting symptoms consistent with expanded moral consciousness rather than psychological trauma. Hartwell documents in medical reports that receive classification beyond standard security protocols. Enhanced situational awareness, focused on life preservation, improved coordination in humanitarian activities, and demonstrated medical knowledge that enables effective casualty care under extreme battlefield conditions. Sergeant Davies, whose 18 months of Western Front service provides perspective on the psychological effects of prolonged combat exposure, undergoes the most dramatic transformation. His tactical assessments now incorporate humanitarian considerations that transcend immediate military objectives, while his leadership demonstrates understanding of moral obligations that unite rather than divide the opposing forces trapped in conditions that reduce human existence to its most fundamental elements. The lads aren't the same men who went out on that patrol, Davies reports during classified briefings that attempt to evaluate supernatural assistance through conventional military assessment criteria. They understand things about battlefield conditions, casualty care, and moral obligation that you can't learn from training manuals. Something about contact with those creatures has changed their fundamental understanding of what military service means. Lieutenant Ashford faces the challenge of constructing official reports that preserve both accuracy and military credibility, while documenting encounters that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality, moral obligation, and the relationship between individual military service and responsibilities that transcend national boundaries. His preliminary account describes the mission in terms that acknowledge supernatural assistance without explicitly admitting contact with entities whose existence violates conventional understanding of zoology and military science. The intelligence value of information obtained through contact with the demon dogs proves immediately applicable to ongoing military operations, yet its application serves humanitarian rather than tactical objectives. Predictions regarding German medical activities demonstrate accuracy that enables British forces to coordinate casualty evacuation efforts that save lives on both sides of no man's land, while tactical intelligence regarding enemy positions facilitates operations designed to minimize rather than maximize human casualties. Captain Blackwood, reviewing operational reports that document tactical successes achieved through intelligence sources that official records cannot acknowledge, recognizes that his command now includes personnel whose capabilities transcend normal human limitations, while their loyalty operates according to principles that encompass rather than exclude the welfare of enemy combatants. The patrol demonstrates tactical competence that exceeds their training and experience. Blackwood reports during classified briefings that attempt to evaluate phenomena beyond standard military intelligence parameters. Their success in predicting enemy humanitarian activities and coordinating cross-line medical cooperation suggests access to information sources that conventional reconnaissance cannot provide while serving objectives that transcend immediate tactical advantage. The official response to the patrol's supernatural encounter reveals institutional challenges created by military personnel whose service bridges the boundary between conventional warfare and humanitarian intervention. The men receive commendations for exceptional reconnaissance performance, while their methods remain classified at levels that ensure permanent concealment from enemy intelligence and civilian oversight. Private Collins, whose metallurgical background provided no preparation for encounters with supernatural entities, demonstrates the most profound alteration in tactical priorities following contact with the demon dogs. His equipment evaluations now focus on humanitarian applications rather than combat effectiveness, while his technical recommendations prioritize life preservation over tactical advantage. I understand things about battlefield conditions that I never learned in steel mills. Collins explains during psychological evaluation sessions that document supernatural assistance in terms that medical science can accommodate. Field medical techniques that work better than anything taught in training courses, methods for locating and protecting wounded personnel that seem to come from knowledge deeper than individual experience. The patrol's enhanced capabilities proved decisive in subsequent operations that transformed D Company's role from conventional assault unit to specialist humanitarian force capable of conducting medical evacuation and casualty care operations under conditions that exceed normal tactical parameters. Their supernatural assistance operates most effectively when focused on life preservation rather than enemy destruction, enabling tactical successes that contribute to moral rather than strategic objectives. Major Hartwell, analyzing intelligence reports that document humanitarian successes achieved through sources that official military doctrine cannot acknowledge, recognizes that the reconnaissance patrol has established contact with forces whose influence transcends the temporal boundaries of individual military campaigns while serving objectives that unite rather than divide the armies trapped in mechanized warfare that reduces human conflict to industrial slaughter. We're achieving coordination with German medical personnel that exceeds documented communication capabilities, Hartwell reports to brigade headquarters during classified briefings that attempt to explain supernatural assistance without acknowledging contact with entities that violate conventional understanding of zoology and moral philosophy. Casualty evacuation rates that suggest access to intelligence sources operating across the entire theater, providing real-time information regarding humanitarian requirements and medical emergencies. The choice offered by the Demon Dogs remains suspended in the consciousness of every patrol member, the opportunity to continue military service beyond the limitations of mortal existence, according to principles that prioritize mercy over victory, protection over destruction, eternal guardianship over temporary tactical advantage. Several men report dreams in which they participate in supernatural rescue operations, moving through killing fields as protectors rather than combatants, serving causes that transcend the political objectives that justify mechanized slaughter. Yet the decision carries implications that extend beyond individual choice to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of military duty, moral obligation, and the relationship between personal service and universal responsibility for the protection of human life. The Demon Dogs offer continuation of military purpose beyond death, but according to criteria that transform warfare from destruction to preservation, from division to unity, among men whose shared experience of courage transcends the artificial boundaries that separate opposing armies. As the Somme offensive continues its grinding advance toward objectives that will never justify the human cost of their achievement, the men of 2nd Platoon carry with them knowledge of forces that operate beyond the temporal boundaries of political conflict, serving principles that unite rather than divide the warriors trapped in conditions where individual survival depends on mutual aid that transcends uniform, nationality, and the strategic objectives that justify their collective sacrifice.